basically explaining this is sort of a research project on the Unique Identity project. The UID in itself not as interesting as perhaps the UID as sitting on the top of a whole series of measures that the Indian state is now putting in place, which we are suspecting could be unprecedented in modern India.
Modern anywhere.
Modern anywhere. At the one side, it is possible that this form of what we call techno-utopia is not new to this country, and there have been previous occasions when, television, for example, or before that, other technologies were used in order to be able to make state support, the state delivery to the intended beneficiaries happen more efficiently. But the question is, first of all, as to whether there is something happening here that's totally new. So you want to start with that? I mean, where do you locate this as a new instrument of state governance?
Oh dear. I think I would put it at different levels. I think when it originally started, the notion of this identity was to reduce the numbers of different identities that a citizen has to have. For example, the citizen has to have a ration card. Maybe if they ever have to migrate abroad or travel abroad, they will need a passport. They will need, some kind of something that will enable them to access a bank account. They will need, a whole range, a driving license, etc. Okay, that instead of each time having to go through a huge caboodle of bureaucracy and do all the things that everybody knows you have to do to get these. It would be simple if you could access multiple things through one card. That was the original idea. I think what it's grown into is not just the evil twin, but the Frankenstein of that particular idea, which is the notion that you can then have a biometric identification of a person, a citizen, a child, anybody, which will somehow automatically transform public delivery and make it efficient. I mean, that's crazy.
But is this a new strategy of... I know there are ethical questions involving targeting.
No, let's forget the ethical part of the time being.
I would say there are 2 or 3 levels to it. One is, I simply oppose this idea because it infringes my civil liberties. 2, it's not going to work. If it were to work, it would probably be a good idea, but I don't think it's going to work. Are they close positions, or would they be?
They are completely different arguments, I would say. I think it's a question of what working means. There are many levels of working. The first point is that can you actually establish a unique identity that will not be subject to change and will be easy for you to establish wherever you are in the country. And I think just that, the technological hurdles are immense. From what I have heard, even the chairman of the UID authority say that these are huge hurdles. We don't know. We don't know whether it's actually physically possible. In very large populations, we know that there's a very significant proportion who will always not be actually, where it won't be viable. I think what's the ratio? Something like 1.3%, which is how many people already? 13 million people already of the population will actually not, you won't be able, that's the kind of error rate in this. Then there is the issue of linking it with biometric, which I think is very problematic because there are certainly fingerprinting isn't good enough. That we know, and especially for manual labor, it's completely unreliable because manual labor's fingerprints change every few years, the more manual labor they do. So you'd have to combine that with other biometric. We don't have any combination of biometric which is foolproof, which is why China abandoned any biometric identifications. I think those are issues. But that to me is not the issue. My problem is that I don't see this as a way of resolving the delivery problems that exist in a whole range of social services. I think this is just one of the ways in which you are possibly trying to simplify, but maybe even complicating public delivery. I can't see it solving the delivery problem. I think that's the critical thing.
No, just thinking aloud. I mean, one thing which is always puzzling one is that why are they doing it? And why go? Because saying that this is whatever technological utopia actually suggests that perhaps it's a good thing, but it's not doable. Now, I don't know whether it's a good thing, but supposing we try to look at their objectives, and why would they be doing it? One is obvious, you're sort of thinking that, I mean, there's this whole drive, which is part of a sort of neoliberal approach to issues economic, in which you want to say that, listen, we've got other ways of solving, issues, problems like growth and India's position in the world economy, ensuring that capitalism is vibrant, etc. But we have a problem about inclusion, and the way in which we went about doing this earlier was we made certain assurances. We tried to give people in general, let's say, some rights or some access to certain set of things, like the public distribution system, for example. So one could be that people are saying that no, that's not the way you want to do it. That you're only trying to deal with some kind of an exclusion, which seems, at least in the interim, unavoidable. So we need to target these people who get excluded. So we need to, we need an identity for these people, so that we are actually going to reach what we want to reach only to them, so that the surpluses we have don't go waste. This could be one possible. The second, I think, is that finally, there's one issue which has always plagued the central government, the Congress, and so on for a long period of time since Mrs. Gandhi, in some sense, post 1969 and so on. And that is the notion that you should, despite the fact that this is so large and so geographically diverse, so huge a country, you should be able to centralize, because you actually saw the state parties, the state governments, the districts, the panchayats, which earlier were celebrated, as part of a more decentralized way of development. That now you thought that, they come in the way, they waste money, we unnecessarily hand over resources to them, and we don't do what they're doing, they're corrupt, and so on and so forth. So you want this huge centralization in a country which otherwise, in just dimensions, doesn't seem to be a country which can be centralized. Okay, so it's the other extreme. As opposed to identifying a set of people who are excluded, you basically want to say that I want to be able to govern directly sitting in a set of offices in South and North Block or wherever it is. I just want to govern this whole country. It could be. So you basically say that, okay, I have this centralized repository of complete knowledge of all my citizens, and which will help me run a highly centralized governance system, right or wrong. And the third, I think, is that I do think that there's one factor which has driven this, which mentioned, but people sort of tend to dismiss it, and that is, I think, the notion that you should take technology into governance, and the way in which you take technology into governance has to be driven by vendors, has come to dominate the way in which we see it ever since the success of the software industry. I mean, software in a generalized sense. Okay. So, for example, if you look at the question of what software do we use for e-governance, or do you look at what software do you use in education in schools and so on, there's a clear difference. I mean, you can have Madhya Pradesh state government saying you should have free software, otherwise it doesn't make sense. It's too expensive for all schools to actually have this. But you have a policy which is drawn up, which essentially brings in the same, the mentor of Infosys and all these characters come in, and they are driven by the whole philosophy of vendors. I mean, Gopal Krishnan used to say this in Madhya Pradesh. Listen, you're not asking us. We are the users, and you're not bothered about the users. You're basically being driven by the vendors. So I think that the fact that there's such a push on the e-governance thing, where suddenly you start saying that so many percent of the budget of each department should be kept aside for computerization or whatever you want to call it, and that everything should be run on e-governance basis. And who do you bring in to advise you on this? You actually bring in the people who are pushing the vendor's point of view, including Nandan Nilekani. I mean, he can't get away from the fact that he gets up one morning and he gets some 21 crores as dividend or whatever it is. I mean, after all, he's part of some setup. So I think that these could be there could be other things. Now, if you take all of this, then basically this has got nothing to do with development. This has got nothing to do with any utopia. It's got to do with one state which is trying to target, because it believes that we've sorted out what's the path of development. We only haven't sorted out the internal exclusion which might occur. A state which believes that you can sit in Delhi and run the whole country. You don't want the state governments and the districts and so on. And you basically rely on what you think is the sort of front end of this whole path, which is your software sector, and so you bring in these people. So I don't know why you call it a utopia. I think it's
the utopia is only to the extent of the deployment of technology as the solution. The assumption that the complex questions of governance that we face in this country can be technologically resolved.
They
That
can't
assumption.
be. That is completely
No, but there's even leapfrogging, for example, this kind of constant assumption that somehow state-of-the-art technology will help solve the problem. And I'm wondering whether this is just another instance of that, or whether there's something new happening here.
I think there's something new. I think this is not just because there are different. I mean, technology is such a big, broad thing, right? So this is not just technology in general. This is a very specific kind of thing. And what surprises me is not so much. I mean, of course, the fact that there is this perception that technology can resolve and that many things have to be vendor-driven and so on. Yeah, but with the UID, I think it's something more specific, which is that you're really saying that this specific technology, which is the establishment of a unique identity for every citizen, that specific technology will suddenly cut through a huge range of all kinds of other problems. I mean, I'm not against, say, computerization or doing things electronically as much as possible, like saving paper and all of that kind of thing. But it's a notion that suddenly you will not get leakage in kerosene subsidies because the UID will prevent leakage, which I cannot understand. On what basis will you say that? You will not have leakage. You're going to have cash transfers, let's say, or coupons instead of public delivery of food grain. And that will not, there'll be no corruption or diversion because of the UID. You're going to have financial inclusion and there's going to be no diversion of the loans meant for poor farmers because of UID. It's completely bizarre and it's nonsensical. There is no way that a UID can prevent any of these things. In fact, if anything, makes it easier actually. So I fail to understand how it can be propagated as a way of resolving all these complex problems of public delivery. I'm incapable of understanding it. But everything you see, the economic survey, everything says, well, we're going to replace this very terrible system of kerosene subsidies, so there's so much diversion, with cash transfers to those who use kerosene. And how will we make sure that the ones who use it and need it, the deserving, get it? Through the UID. How does that happen? Not clear at all. On what basis?
Just wanted to, bring the question to the one area that is explicitly the area of your expertise, and that is this whole question of rural credit. Because that appears, at least to us, that, if there's one claim that they're making, it's around this whole business about attaching the UID, the unique number to a bank account, a no-frills bank account. That's the one claim that they're making. My understanding would be that to a great extent, because the UID itself is in some ways an empty vessel, it is as though the uses to which it is being put by different delivery mechanisms. So the public distribution system will have one reason for why they want to do it. They will, for example, say that they want purely, at least in AP that's what they're saying, they want to purely curb leakages. That's the primary purpose. Or deduplication is something that they want to be able to do. Other schemes that use it, for example, the midday meal scheme in Jharkhand is apparently using the UID, and there are other such schemes.
You mean children are supposed to be showing UIDs?
No, the biometric authentication in schools, so biometric attendance. So a child who is entitled to a midday meal is a child who's given her biometrics at the time of entering the school, or rather at the time of attending school.
Tell me, has anybody made an estimate that if you have to set up this technology such that, presuming that we successfully put all our children to school, has anybody just made an estimate of what it will cost? Do they have an idea? Because you're basically saying that in every school you're going to have the equipment which will do this. It's going to then generate information which goes and gets logged somewhere. You don't even know what it costs still to give them schools.
But also, why is it so difficult to imagine a situation where village education committees monitor the children who are in school and who aren't? Surely that's something that should be happening anyway. Is happening in the states where it's successful, where you have universal primary education. That's done, monitored by local village education committees who don't need biometrics because they happen to know every child in the village in a way. But can I come back to this rural credit question? Because I think that's really also a classic example of where they just have not understood complexity. Let's take, say, Telangana, where about 84% of the crop loans given are outside institutional credit. That is to say, they're from private money lenders, input dealers, etc., etc. Why? Because the others don't get access. Why don't they get access? Because they're not recognized as farmers. who are the people who are not recognized as farmers? Any tenant, anybody who doesn't have a land title, and I don't know if you know, but Telangana land title is crazy. It is, pre-independence, and most of the actual owners don't have the proper title. Okay? It's completely anarchic and ridiculous what's going on. So even the actual owners don't have titles, the tenant farmers certainly don't have titles, women farmers almost never get titles, so automatically you're excluded. Okay? Unless you can find some way of establishing that so-and-so is a farmer, which I don't see how a UID does. Because I may be a farmer today and not next season. I may stop being a farmer. The fact that I have got some biometric identification where some fellow came and saw me ploughing a field in 2010 doesn't prove that I will be a farmer in 2011. Okay? So this whole thing about access to institutional credit and getting crop loans is not resolved at all. The problem remains larger than ever for the average farmer cultivator who is denied access to institutional credit on the grounds that they're not farmers. How does UID resolve it? It doesn't resolve it at all. All they have is a number.
Andhra Pradesh was one of the first states which under Chandrababu Naidu supposedly digitized out its land records.
Exactly. Yes.
Huge amount of
huge amount of money was spent on supposedly digitizing land records. You will not find the records on the web because they don't exist, because it's completely crazy. There has been no codification, especially in Telangana, of land records since the 60s. And no one dares to do it because basically their throats will be cut.
But the specific question, I was saying that, while there are many schemes that are...
No, but you talked about rural credit.
Absolutely, I'm coming to exactly that.
Yes.
I was saying that to the extent I understand it, that while different schemes are in different states using the UID in ways that they choose to understand what good it will do for them, the one claim that UID is making is the claim of the no-frills bank account.
No, but
why is UID making
what is the environment
That's
in which we are? The environment in which you are is that it's formal policy that because transaction costs, when you're trying to deliver small doses of credit to remotely located borrowers, who live are involved in activities in which they are vulnerable. They're vulnerable for losses and so on. The transaction costs are so high that it's no point trying to reach formal banking to these people. You're actually, the whole argument now in banking policy, which of course is wrong, is that you withdraw the banking system and you use agency banking. So you use microfinance institutions, you use money lenders, you use whoever you want. And the money might come from the banks, it might come from big finance capital, but it is basically mediated by a set of agents who are supposed to be ones who can operate this with less transaction costs and can ensure that there is a high rate of recovery. Now if you're going to do that, what am I going to do with this no-frills bank account? There's no bank out there.
Let me put it this way. Insofar as we have no-frills bank accounts now, it's entirely because of NREGS. Entirely, okay? What's happened is that in a number of states they've decided they will give the payment only through bank accounts or postal savings accounts. In fact, postal savings dominates because we don't have banks, as we said. So it's post offices which have been opening accounts, and that's the no-frills bank account, entirely related to NREGS. You don't need a UID for that.
Two things I was particularly interested in is, one is the back history to financial inclusion. In terms of how do you see the current history of financial inclusion and the current RBI measures towards financial inclusion as differing from the social and development banking imaginary of 1969? And secondly, the prehistory to direct cash transfers. I was wondering if there is
These are huge areas. Okay, Chandru knows much more about the banking system, but I just want to clarify one particular issue, which is that, listen, why are there high transaction costs, or why do people not want to lend to others in the village, etc.? It's basically about asymmetric information. You really don't know who is going to be able to repay or is likely to repay, and so on and so forth. Traditional moneylenders worked because they had usually other means of ensuring that they got the payment, right?